Behind the white curtains of plantation life, power was not only cruel, it was intimate. In the grand homes of the antebellum South, sunlight fell through lace windows onto polished wood, casting perfect order across a world built on pain. To the outside world, the plantation was elegance, civility, and grace. Inside, it was a house of unspoken fears. History has told us again and again that white women were victims of a patriarchal system, fragile and confined. But that version of history hides something filthy, a secret that stains the myth of their purity. Because some of those women, trapped within the walls of their gilded cages, learned to wield the same kind of power that once broke them. And when they did, their cruelty took a quieter, darker form. Footsteps on wooden floors, the creak of a closing door. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was control. Every corner of that silence carried the weight of what wasn't said, the things no one dared to write. Beneath the surface of order and gentility, there existed another reality. One where white mistresses, told they were powerless, ruled over the enslaved with their own set of punishments, humiliations, and demands. Theirs was a power born of envy and confinement, a power that corrupted, and one that history refused to name. The antebellum South was a world obsessed with appearances, a society built on hierarchy, gender, and race. White men held political and economic control. White women were expected to uphold virtue and morality. Enslaved people were expected to serve, to disappear, to carry the burdens of their masters' contradictions. Every layer of this world depended on the silence of the one below it. The white mistress, cloaked in modesty and faith, appeared pure, but within the system of slavery, she was an owner, an overseer, and often a punisher. Plantation records and letters reveal how deeply this authority ran. A mistress could order an enslaved man to work in her home, to serve her table, to tend her gardens, or to run errands that brought him within her reach. In that proximity, a twisted kind of control grew. When she was humiliated by her husband or denied respect in public, she found a different kind of power waiting behind closed doors. It was a power that didn't just command obedience, it demanded submission. Society told her she was weak, but in that lie she found her license to act without accountability. Her cruelty could hide beneath manners. Her dominance could wear the face of gentility. Her punishments could be called correction, her anger moral discipline. In truth, it was control, raw, personal, and often disturbingly intimate. There was no justice for the enslaved. If a white mistress accused an enslaved man of disrespect, he could be beaten, sold, or killed. If she whispered an accusation, her word was law. The same woman who preached Christian virtue at Sunday service could, within her own home, destroy a life with a sentence. Every interaction between her and the enslaved was laced with unspoken threat, an invisible weapon more powerful than any whip. The enslaved men who worked near the house lived under that shadow. They understood that their strength, their youth, their very presence could be turned against them. They were forbidden to look too long, to speak too freely, to stand too close. Yet they were constantly within reach, cleaning, carrying, obeying. Power and proximity became a dangerous combination. And when loneliness or bitterness took hold in the mind of a mistress, boundaries dissolved. What was forbidden became possible because in her eyes he wasn't a man, he was property. It's a truth so disturbing that history still struggles to say it aloud. Within slavery, domination took many forms, and some of the most haunting came not from the lash of the overseer, but from the quiet orders of a woman who smiled in daylight and ruled in silence at night. These were not acts of love or affection. They were acts of power, the most corrupt kind, because they hid behind civility. Enslaved men carried this burden in silence. To resist was to die. To speak was impossible. Their dignity was stripped away in private, and the world outside would never believe them. Their humanity was a fragile secret, something they had to protect even as it was constantly stolen. For them, survival meant obedience, endurance, and quiet. They learned to move carefully, to say little, to live in the gaps between the demands of those who owned them. History tried to forget these stories because they unsettled every myth the South built about itself. The myth of the chaste white woman, the noble plantation family, the moral Christian home. But the truth always finds its way through cracks. It lingers in journals, in half-written letters, in the uncomfortable silences of descendants who inherited memories they can't quite name. The white mistress was supposed to embody grace and virtue, yet in the hidden corners of her authority, she could become something else. A reminder that power, when mixed with frustration and privilege, can twist into cruelty. And that cruelty didn't always scream. Sometimes it whispered, sometimes it smiled, and sometimes it wore perfume that in the years that followed. The silence grew heavier. The white mistresses went on to be remembered as refined, elegant women of the Old South. Their portraits hanging in museums, their names carved into family Bibles. The enslaved men they commanded were left as shadows, unnamed, unrecorded, forgotten. But their stories lived in whispers, passed through generations, carried in the tremor of old songs and the quiet pain that refused to fade. When emancipation came, freedom didn't erase the memories of what had been done behind those plantation doors. Many freed men spoke of beatings, of endless labor, of humiliation, but some wounds were too personal, too dangerous to describe. What words could capture the shame of being both feared and violated, both strong and powerless? What language could make sense of a world that turned survival into submission? These men walked into freedom carrying scars the world could not see. Historians would later uncover fragments, letters from mistresses confessing sins of the heart, diaries noting private shames, and testimony that hinted at relationships that were never truly mutual. Plantation journals spoke of disciplinary actions against enslaved men accused of insolence or improper conduct. Behind those words lay unspeakable truths, acts of vengeance disguised as virtue, control disguised as care. This was the hidden architecture of slavery. Every person within it became both prisoner and enforcer. White women, denied public power, found it in private cruelty. Enslaved men, denied humanity, were forced to endure it in silence. Both were shaped by a system so filthy, so disturbingly complete, that it corrupted everything it touched, even compassion, even desire. And yet, the echoes of that corruption remain. The mythology of white innocence still lingers in textbooks, in films, in the sanitized language of Southern charm. The story of the white mistress is told in lace and laughter, not in control and fear. But to understand the full horror of slavery, the world must confront her too, not as a victim, but as a participant in the machinery of domination. The enslaved men's pain cannot be measured in words. It was psychological, spiritual, generational. It fractured their sense of manhood, leaving behind an unspoken inheritance of mistrust and trauma. Within families descended from those men, silence became survival. They didn't tell their children the details, they only passed down the warning. Never trust the system that once owned you. As time passed, the ghosts of these stories began to resurface. Modern historians, searching through archives and oral traditions, began to find them, faint, fragmented but undeniable. What they uncovered challenged everything America believed about its past. The same society that painted white women as the moral heart of civilization was built on a system that allowed them to command human lives, to destroy them, and to hide behind their innocence. It is a truth that breaks the heart and shatters the illusion of purity. Because power, when left unchecked, becomes addiction. And in slavery, addiction to power became a way of life. A sickness that infected every hand that held a chain, every mouth that stayed silent, every soul that turned away. This story is not told to condemn one gender or absolve another. It is told because truth demands to be heard. These hidden histories, the nasty, dirty, disturbing ones, are the backbone of the world we live in today. To ignore them is to repeat them in new forms under new names. Imagine walking through an abandoned plantation today. The walls still stand, cracked by time, but the air feels heavy. Every room hums with what it once witnessed. Not just the shouts and orders, but the whispers, the stolen breath, the quiet acts of control that history erased. The portraits on the walls smile with painted serenity, but behind those eyes lies everything that was never said. History loves heroes and villains, But slavery left no one untouched by its corruption. Some carried the chains, others carried the lies, and both still echo in our bloodlines, shaping how we see power, gender, and race even now. To uncover these truths is not to shame the past. It is to free ourselves from the weight of denial. Because silence, too, is a kind of violence. And every truth buried beneath politeness is a wound that never heals. This is not just Black history, it is human history. It is a story of what happens when power goes unchecked, when cruelty hides behind civility, when morality is twisted to justify control. The white mistresses of the South may have died long ago, but their silence lives on in every untold story, every polite omission, every myth of purity that refuses to die. The truth, as ugly as it is, sets the record straight. This was never just the story of power. It was the story of what power destroyed, the story of men stripped of their dignity, of women corrupted by control, and of a nation built on silence. Because behind every white curtain on every plantation, there were two worlds. One that history wrote down, and one it chose to forget. And the forgotten world, the one built on hidden abuse, on domination disguised as virtue, still demands to be seen.